Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my June wrap up. So it is currently the 30th of June today, but I don't think I am going to finish any more books this month, so I decided I would get head on with doing this wrap up, so that is what I'm going to be doing now. So again, I had a pretty good reading month in June. I was really happy with a lot of the books I read. There were some really good books in June that I read and I'm going to tell you all about them now. First book that I finished in June was actually a novella, and that was The Dragon's Bride by Katee Robert. I have read a book by Katee Robert in the past and have enjoyed it pretty much. A lot of her books are pretty much the same in terms of they're kind of these smutty type of romance books, really easy to read, just kind of fun, like don't take them too seriously type reads, and this one was the exact same. I will say one of the big draws for this book for me was actually the cover. I just really love the covers of this series of books, this kind of monster romance that she's doing, but the story was a little bit meh. Like, it wasn't absolutely amazing, it wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, but I still did quite enjoy it. In this book we are following a woman called Briar Rose, who we find out at the very start of the book she is running away from an abusive relationship, and she ends up selling her soul to this demon, and she's going to be married off to this other monster in this like demon underworld type of place, this like kind of monster realm, and she's going to be married off to one of the leaders of this monster realm, and I think she can be married for 7 years, and then she's free. They start this relationship, it turns sexual very quickly, and yeah, it kind of grows from there, and they're obviously like falling in love and romance, and there's a little bit of ups and downs there. So yeah, like it was fine, it was very basic. I would have liked to have known a lot more about like the world itself, and kind of like the ins and outs of this world, like as a fantasy reader myself, I would have loved to known a lot more. Like, I needed a lot more world building when it came to this type of story. We never really find out how Briar Rose finds out about the monsters in the first place. Like, is it a thing that like the humans just know about the monsters, or did she stumble across it somehow? Like, how did this whole thing happen? We never get, like, we're never told. And then as well, one of the things in this book is that the male monster, like, of the story, he has like 2 penises, so he's kind of able to give her like obviously double the pleasure when they're like having sex. But like, I kind of wanted to know like the biology of that, like how that worked for him in every other instance other than sex. Like, you can obviously, for obvious reasons, you can see why it is like pretty handy during sex to have 2 penises, but like when it comes to like, you know, like having a wee, like how does that work? Like we never find out anything about that. It's just like, oh yeah, he's got 2 penises and like that's going to be amazing for her, and that's all we get. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, there's like, it's just a very basic, when it comes to the fantasy elements, it was very basic, and I just wanted to know so much more. Like, things were just thrown in for like like for the story, and we just had to accept that this was the way it was. We weren't going to get any explanations or answers when it came to a lot of things, which, you know, it's not surprising. It's a short book. Like, you're not going to get everything that you want in like that you would normally get in say like a 400-500 page fantasy book. So yeah, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. I will probably continue reading the rest of the series because I'm intrigued how the other romances go. So yeah. After that, I've picked up Single Bald Female by Laura Price. This is a book I got from Book Break for an honest review, and I also buddy read this with Aoife over Pretty Purple Polka Dots. So this is a contemporary book. We are following a character who is, I think she's just gone 31 in this book. Her name is Jessica, and we find out at the start of the book that she's just gotten her like kind of her dream job. She thinks she's in a good place with her boyfriend, and then like she's kind of like, okay, this is like where my life starts. Like, everything has like fit into place, and this is where things are going to go up from here. And then she very swiftly realizes that that's not the case, and she ends up getting diagnosed with breast cancer. So she suddenly has to deal with thinking about chemo, how she's going to struggle with like her job, and like her new role as an editor in the magazine that she's at, and how she's going to cope all of that around like obviously like chemo treatment, cancer treatment, and you know, just that fear and the struggle of living with cancer and not knowing if you're going to get better. So yeah, we really go with Jessica on her cancer diagnosis in this. This is kind of own voices, because the author herself was actually, I think she was 29 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, so it feels like she's speaking a lot from experience in terms of like the worries and fears that Jessica is going through, particularly around her fertility. Now, I do think the fertility, I guess, fear or worry was almost overdone in a way in this book, the way Jessica kind of hyper focused on her fertility, as like kind of like, you know, like it would just be a little bit harder, obviously because of the cancer treatment. If she doesn't have frozen embryos, it would be harder for her to conceive in the future. And just the way she kind of focused on it and the way she talked about it was a little bit like, you know, every single woman in the world wants to be a mother, where like obviously that's not true, and then almost like forgetting that there are so many other ways to be a family other than actually, you know, conceiving and carrying your own child. There are many different ways to have a family, and I just, yeah, the hyper focus on fertility kind of rubbed me up a little bit the wrong way. I do understand those fears, and I understand why people would think about these, but I just thought it was a little bit overdone in the book. She becomes friends with another cancer patient who was just that little bit too manic pixie dream girl. Like she was just that little bit too perfect and too happy-go-lucky the whole time, and her relationship does break down, and then she kind of goes on like a dating journey, dating with cancer. But she does a lot of this dating like right at the start of her chemo treatment, and I just kind of like was thinking like obviously I can't speak from experience, but I was thinking like, from what I know of chemo and what I know of like of cancer treatment, the last thing you probably want to be doing is going out to like pubs and like all sorts of places, meeting new people, having to deal with all of that, like because you're sick and you're tired and you're like, you're obviously really vigilant for germs and stuff. So obviously like I wouldn't be thinking that like say like one night stands or kissing people you don't know, like kissing strangers that you don't know where they've been or who they've been with is a good idea. So yeah, that kind of felt a little bit not unrealistic, because again, like every single person is different, especially when it comes to say to a cancer diagnosis. But there were some things like that where I was just like, I don't know. I actually would have loved so much more about her like role as editor of this magazine, and so much of that was like in the background, and we kind of like we were skipped past so many bits of her like working in the magazine, and that was what I kind of wanted to know more of. This was a little bit like, you know, like the Big C meets the Devil Wears Prada, and I would have just loved more of like the Devil Wears Prada bits, because I think that was like really interesting, and we just didn't get as much of that, and I was really disappointed with that. So yeah, this was an okay book for me. It was a 3 out of 5 stars. I would probably read more of what Laura Price writes. I really appreciate a lot of the things that she put forward in this book. I feel like it was probably a very personal book for her to write, but overall, as the story goes and the writing, it was just a 3 stars for me. After that, I read The Miniaturst by Jessie Burton. This is a reread for me. I've read this a few times now, so I decided this go round on my reread, I decided to give the audiobook a go, which was actually really fun, because Jessie Burton herself is a trained actress, so she was able to do the audiobook for this, and she did a really good job. A young character called Nella, she's just 18, and she's been married off to this merchant who's a good bit older than her. So she like arrives in Amsterdam, doesn't really know what to expect from married life, and she enters this house that from the start is really cold and really unwelcome. Her husband, like he's fine to her, but he's not necessarily like, he's not coming to her bed, he's not giving her affection or love or anything like that. And then she has to deal with the she has to deal with like kind of the coldness and the cruelty of her husband's sister, so her new sister-in-law, who is just a very kind of pious and not particularly like feeling woman. And Nella is just really like, she's really lonely, and then her husband gives her this kind of like miniature house, kind of like almost like a big dollhouse, and she finds a miniaturist who's able to kind of like make like little things for this dollhouse. And from the get-go, the miniaturist starts making things that there's no way like they could know, like there's no way she could know these things about the house and about these people. Yeah, this is just about Nella kind of, you know, kind of growing up in a way, growing up very quickly, and then kind of uncovering the secrets of the family that she's after entering, and because she's now family, she has to keep those secrets herself, and seeing that, you know, her life, the life that she dreamed of, is going to be very different to the life that she's living. I really love this book. I think it's so atmospheric. I think it tells like I think the way it shows Amsterdam at this time, this very kind of Christian, really like almost like spying on your neighbours kind of way as well, like that, like, you know, like that kind of preaching at the time, not so much love thy neighbour but more so spy on thy neighbour. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting, and I always really love a reread of this book. I always forget how much I just enjoy being sunk into this story, and yeah, I'm really excited to read the sequel. So this was a 4 stars read for me. It normally is a 4-star read, 4 to a 5-star read, and yeah, really excited to read the sequel. After that, I picked up Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This was a really lovely book. I really enjoyed reading this. I pretty much read this in like one day. So this is a book that we are following a few different timelines. So we are following a character in 1912, we are following a character in 2020, and we're following a character in 2200, and then we're also following a character in 2400. So yeah, like all these like time, like history and time, and we are following how a bunch of these characters all experience the same anomaly at some point during their lives, where they kind of enter this space and the world kind of falls away from them, and they find themselves in this kind of tunnel where they can hear this violin playing, and so everyone is kind of like, they don't really know what's happening. And then in 2400 we're following a character who is he turns out he ends up being a time traveler, and he's ended up like kind of tasked with this mission to find out what the story is with this anomaly in time, and what is going on. And he ends up going back in time to try and figure out like what is going on, and meeting these people and trying to find out what it was, what's like the thing that is connecting all of these people together, and why did they all experience this anomaly. One of the characters in this book, in the 2200, she is living on the moon colonies, and she's actually traveling to Earth talking about her book, which is a book set around a pandemic, and she's doing this book tour when a pandemic happens on Earth. And that was just really, really interesting, because obviously Emily St. John Mandel wrote Station 11, which was about like a flu pandemic, obviously years before coronavirus. So yeah, she's kind of, I think some of the things that she's talking about, she's like kind of bringing her own experience to life in a way. I just really love this book. I just thought it flowed really, really well. I loved how all the timelines and the time travel worked. I think time travel can be really confusing sometimes in books, and I just really loved the way it was done in this. I thought it was really easy. Once you kind of got what was happening, I felt like it was actually really easy to understand, and I really loved how it all ended up in the end. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this book. I just thought it slotted together so nicely, and this one actually makes me really excited to read The Glass Hotel, because I do think we have a character in this who's also in The Glass Hotel. It has just reminded me of how lovely Emily St. John Mandel writing is, and I need to continue on with reading her books, and probably also at some point give Station 11 a reread, because it's been a really long time since I read that. So yeah, this one was a 4 out of 5 stars for me. Really, really enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend it. I did a nutty buddy read with Fran over Frannock on the Pages, and that is The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake. This is a book I actually have a full review of on my TikTok channel, so I will leave a link to my TikTok down below if you wanted to go and see that. The book is kind of a new adult urban fantasy book where we are following a bunch of really talented magicians, where they are basically given this opportunity to enter this secret society, the Alexandrian Society, and the 6 of them enter this society knowing that they're going to spend a year there, but at the end of the year only 5 of them are actually allowed to continue on with this society and to actually be a part of the society. So one of them will be kicked out, and we're finding out all about these 6 magicians. They're kind of like some of the best and like brightest in the world. They all have particular abilities that are like really, really good, and like no one else is able to do what they do, and they all have very, very different personalities, and they have ways of like finding things out about each other, manipulating each other. Like you have a girl who's able to read minds, you've a guy who's able to manipulate emotions. Like you have some like kind of scary powers, and as well as the ones that are able to actually do things like in the physical world, like, you know, throw things across the room, have plants grow, like all this kind of stuff. Yeah, this one was kind of like a mixed bag for me. I really love the premise of it. I love the world that Olivie Blake has written. I really like kind of like the start of the magic, and like the magic that she is portraying to us, this magical world, this world where magic is a thing. Everyone knows that magic exists, but not everyone is able to do that magic. But we're in a world where it seems that magic is used for good. I would have loved to have known a lot more about that when it came to kind of how magic is used in terms of like things like the environment. Is the world that the people are living in this world, is it a better world than the world we are in terms of like climate change and like sustainability because of magic? I would love to have known more about that. I did really like the chemistry between all of the characters. There was like this like kind of darkly sexy vibe throughout the whole book that I really, really enjoyed. I do feel like this book like lasted a year. Like it's a year timeline. And I feel like nothing happened. I was like, and like the time would go really, really quickly, where like you'd be halfway through like someone's chapter and you'd find out that like 3 months had passed, and I was like, oh, okay. Like the timeline for me, like I just felt like it went so fast for not much happening. And yeah, I just felt like I wanted more about what they were studying, what like they were doing in like their classes or their lectures. And yeah, I just felt like I was missing a lot. and I just wanted more. Like how this book ended, it gave some really nice twists and turns. For the twists I did see coming, nothing was like a particular surprise for me, but it definitely made me excited for book 2, and I would definitely be picking up book 2 and seeing like how that all like works out and where the author is going to go with the story. So yeah, kind of, as I said, a mixed bag, so I gave it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I also read For Aunties and a Wedding by Jessie Sutanto. This is the second book in the Dial A for Aunties series, and this is kind of a contemporary book, which is kind of like cozy mystery / crime book. And the first book, we follow a character called Madeline who ends up on a blind date that's been set up for her by her mother, and on this date she accidentally kills the guy that she's on a date with, and she ends up dialing like A for Aunties. She ends up ringing her mum and her aunties to say like, please help me, I think I'm after killing this guy. And absolute hijinks ensue as they have to try and hide the body. They have a big wedding on the next day, as like a wedding organizer caterers kind of company. They end up having to bring this body to the wedding to try and figure out what to do with him while they're at this venue. And it is just absolutely crazy. It is so funny, so dramatic, and I absolutely loved the first book. I just thought it was so funny, so I was really excited to read the second one and see what happened. And in this book we are following Maddie again and her aunties as Maddie actually gets ready for her own wedding, and we see how they as just literally just like the day before her wedding, they find out that the organisers that they have hired for this wedding seem to be some type of like mob family, and they are after someone who was at Maddie's wedding. So Maddie and her aunties end up having to try and figure out who these people are after, if they can protect them, and if they can stop this family like doing something really bad. And again, it is absolutely like crazy, just so funny. The aunties, the dynamic there is just absolutely like spot on with all the aunties and Madeline and her mum, and the way they all act towards each other, but at the same time they all work together to like help each other out, even though they might fight while they're doing it. Didn't love this one as much as the first one. I think I just felt kind of sorry for Maddie a lot during this one, that her wedding was kind of spoiled by this incident, and I kind of felt like she deserved a little bit better than like the absolute like shit show that her wedding ended up being. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I did still enjoy it, and I would actually really love a third book, because I feel like we've had the first one, we've had the wedding, and now I feel like we need one where there's like a baby or a pregnancy or something, just to kind of tie up everything. I think it would just be really fun to have that, and to have the aunties kind of be like grand aunties in a way, and like the man become a granny. Like I think that would just be really funny to see like how they behave. So yeah, I would really love a third book. Then I listened to an audiobook, and that was When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This is like a social horror thriller book following a character called Sydney who lives in this neighborhood which has been a historically black neighborhood. I think it's in New York, and we see her really struggle as she's dealing with grief over her mother, who was really ill. She has kind of like piling debts as well, and we're also seeing how basically around her every single day, people she's known her entire life are disappearing, and new people are coming in to live on this block. Like houses are being sold, and these new families and people are coming in. Most of them are like affluent white folk. See how this is like changing in the neighborhood a lot, and Sydney's like just really disturbed. She feels like there's something more happening, that there's something kind of sinister going on in the background somewhere. And then we also follow Theo, who lives across the road from Sydney. He's one of these like kind of affluent white guys who are after moving into the neighborhood, but he's really nice, and he really likes Sydney, and the two of them start up a relationship, and he starts helping her try and figure out what is going on, and they find out that the both of them have a lot of secrets. This one was horrific, like this, like in terms of the subject matter, and I just thought it was so tense. It was so psychological in nature. I felt so uncomfortable so many times reading this, especially as like, you know, like a white woman reading this, and reading how just like what had happened in history in this neighborhood, then like that effect of gentrification, seeing like Sydney's like her grief as her neighborhood is changed before her eyes, how she becomes a stranger or almost like an enemy within her own neighborhood, within her home base. It was so sad and uncomfortable to read. I've seen like reviews of this, people saying that they found this book a little bit boring and like they didn't really like it. Now I listened to this on audiobook. I don't know if that played a part in my enjoyment of the book and how tense and uncomfortable I was reading it, and how like I just felt myself like waiting for the end. I needed to know what happened, and I just felt so excited for the end, but also I was so scared to find out what was going on and what was going to happen. I just think this was done so well, that like social horror element of it, like obviously what is happening in this book is taken to an extreme level, but it's a very very thing that is happening, and I just thought the way Alyssa Cole did it was absolutely brilliant. So I gave this a really strong like 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend, but especially would recommend it on audiobook. That I read Dark Fire by CJ Sansom. This is the second book in the Matthew Shardlake series, the first of which I read last year. So in this one we are following a lawyer called Matthew Shardlake, and he is practicing around this time in King Henry VIII's reign. He has married Anne of Cleves, and he is about to, you know, divorce Anne of Cleves because he wants to marry Catherine Howard, and we're seeing kind of the unrest in terms of particularly around religion and religious prosecution at the time in England. And we are following Matthew as, number one, he takes on a case of a girl who has been accused of murder, and she refuses to speak, and she's in her jail cell, and she is, you know, at the time like people couldn't really, like, a fair trial wasn't really like a thing, and Matthew takes on her case, and at the same time he ends up being called by his old boss Cromwell, who wants him to investigate kind of this rumour that Greek fire, this like really kind of like a thing that could be weaponized, has been discovered and has been made. And King Henry VIII, obviously, if Greek fire is around, he wants it because he wants to be able to use it as a weapon, and Cromwell asks Matthew to look into this matter around Greek fire and if he can like find out anything about it. So we're following Matthew on these two cases, and I just really enjoy this. I just really enjoyed both of kind of the mysteries, I guess, kind of like both of the investigations that he's undergoing, and how like he kind of weaves around the two of them. They're not necessarily linked in any way, but I really liked how, you know, how he balanced the two of them really well. We kind of get a sidekick character in this as well, who is going to continue on in the other books, and I really liked the inclusion of that. Not really more of a partner, but someone who is definitely kind of more like he's not really, he's more than an assistant. Like he has an assistant role, but he's more than an assistant really. I really liked his character and how like that friendship was kind of born. I just really love spending time with Matthew because I think he's just a really wonderful character. He's so multifaceted, he's so human in many levels. Again, Matthew, I've said it before, Matthew was born as a humpback, and we see how this, you know, just in terms of like his everyday life, how he deals with that, how people treat him when they see his disfigurement and his disability, how kind of things like pains and aches and like, you know, just like things he struggles with himself, like physically and with his health because of this, and what he has to do and the sacrifices he has to make to continue like his job as someone who, you know, isn't completely able-bodied in a way. I just really like how all of that is in there. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book, but I still did really like it. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars as well, and I'm really excited to read the next one. After that, I read We Are All Birds of Uganda by Hafsa Zayyan. This is a book that is partly set in England and partly set in Uganda. We are following two different timelines. A young lawyer in London called Samir, as he is, you know, like doing really well in his job. He is offered this really like great kind of promotion slash move where he is going to be able to help set up an office with his company in Singapore, but he ends up he's going to have to tell his parents that he's going to be moving country, and obviously this is like a really big deal for his parents. They don't want him to move. They had emigrated when his father was young from Uganda to London, and they are kind of is it East African Asians or East Asian, I think it's East African Asians, which I never knew about this like kind of cohort of people. I never knew about the Asian like exorcist in Uganda. I didn't know about like this whole community of people that were thrown out of Uganda back in the 80s, like the 70s, the 80s. So this was really interesting to learn about. Following Samir as he has to try and struggle with kind of family obligations versus like his own desires and wishes. He ends up going on holiday to Uganda to kind of get away with get away from everything, and he goes to try and like find out more about his family history and what happened to his family in Uganda, and like his grandfather whose obviously ties to Uganda were very, very strong. And he ends up discovering so much more about himself and his family when he's in Uganda. He finds a kind of a new love for Uganda, and he realizes that he wants to completely change the course of his life following this trip to Uganda. This was kind of like a slow book, where like I feel like the pacing of this book was off. We get so much of it to the lead up to Samir's trip to Uganda, and like the Uganda bit like didn't really start until like 70-80% into the book, and then I felt like that last 20% was really was really rushed, where I felt like I would have liked more time with Samir's journey in Uganda rather than the lead up to it, and then the last bit of it was just really rushed, and it felt like there was like kind of like an insta love. It felt like a lot of Samir's decisions like were just really wishy-washy. I did find myself really disliking Samir as a character. For a lot of this book, he was quite a weak character in many ways, in how he wouldn't stand up for himself. And like I understand there was like a culture there as well within his family of he was the son, he was supposed to come back, like, you know, do all that, like study as a lawyer, work really hard as a lawyer, but then he was supposed to give all that up and come back and join the family business and, you know, like be with the family business with his father, and that's like give up all of his like financial independence as well, and then go back under the family wing and under like within the family bank account and stuff, which, you know, is really hard. Like very few people would want to do that. So I understand like the hardship there of having to stand up with that, but he felt like very weak for the entire book. And then even at the end of the book, when he'd made these decisions and really, you know, stood by his decisions, he then kind of backtracked again, and like was just really frustrating to read. And I was like, would you just like cop on and just, you know, if you're saying you're going to do something, just do it. Like it was really annoying to read. And then the end of this book was just, I was so disappointed by the ending of this book. It was so like cut, like it was really like, it was real, we were left on a real kind of like cliffhanger, like, oh, what happened moment, and I really didn't like it. Yeah, this book just like really disappointed me in many ways, and I really love learning more about the history of Indian immigrants in Uganda, Indian Muslim immigrants in Uganda, and how what happened there, and how they were eventually all kind of like thrown out of Uganda during a time of political unrest, and how there was a lot of racism there. Yeah, but the end of this book just really disappointed me. I actually couldn't believe it, and I had a big rant like to my boyfriend when I finished reading it that night, and he was laughing at me. But yeah, I was really annoyed when I finished reading this because I was so disappointed in it. So I gave it like a 2.5 stars. Really disappointed, and I don't think I'd recommend it. The book I read after that then was Persuasion by Jane Austen. This was a reread for me, and I really enjoyed it. Rereading this just kind of reaffirmed my love in Jane Austen's writing. It reminded me of why I love her writing so much. I really enjoyed like revisiting Anne Elliot in this book. It'd been a really long time since I read this, and I feel like I had a newfound appreciation for Anne in this book, and like everything she's going through, her quiet tenacity, kind of her maturity, from the time obviously in this book when she was persuaded not to marry this guy, and then years later he comes back into her life and she's trying to figure out what to do and how to behave around him, and we see that kind of love blossom again. Wentworth's letter in this book was just like, absolutely, I've always heard people talk about Wentworth's letter and I never really got it before, but when I read it in this book, I got it. I really got it. So this was a 5-star read for me. Really enjoyed it. Absolutely loved rereading this, and I definitely need to reread more of my other Jane Austen books, because yeah, it's been a really long time since I reread them, and I just loved rereading this one so much. Then I read the Book of Hope by Jane Goodall and Douglas Abrams. This is basically like a conversation between Douglas Abrams and Jane Goodall, who is a kind of like a naturalist and environmental activist, and she is just such an inspiring, wonderful person. Like the fact that we have people like her in this world just makes this world a better place. This whole book, as I said, it's kind of a conversation between the two of them. It's kind of partly set before COVID hits, like literally like December 2019, and then they have another conversation afterwards in late 2020. And just the way she talks about the world, about like, you know, her feelings on hope, her growing up, like her experiences so far in this world, and like the ups and downs that she has experienced. I just loved this book. It felt like you were sitting in the room with them, like kind of cozy in this conversation, sharing a cup of tea or a glass of whiskey with Jane, and I just had such a lovely time reading this. It's a really, I feel like when you're a lot of books around climate change and the environment, they can be quite pessimistic in a lot of ways, and they can make you feel really worried and feel really down about the future of this planet and like what humans are doing to this planet, where this book is like the complete opposite. This is a very hopeful book. It's a very uplifting book. Jane's voice is just so bright and intelligent and wonderful, and I just think she is just an absolutely extraordinary person. And yeah, I just couldn't recommend this book enough. I had such a lovely time reading it, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. And then the last book I finished reading this month was The Death of Vivek Ogee by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a book set in Nigeria. We are following a family as a mother opens her front door and finds the body of her son on the front step, and he is dead, and she doesn't know what has happened to him. And then we're kind of flashing back and forth from Vivek's childhood and his relationship with his cousin, and then some of his female friends, and then we are following the mother as she tries to figure out what happened to her son, and how he ended up dead on her doorstep, and what happened that day that the market burnt down and her son died. And this is a book about like kind of growing up, struggles with gender identity, gender fluidity, sexuality, and kind of not being able to be yourself in a world where you are kind of shamed for being who you are. And like this book, there's a lot of like sadness in this book, because obviously like it starts with a death, and you're following a character who you know is going to die, and die really young, and it's really sad because of that. But there's also like a lot of love and friendship and companionship in this book as well, and you see how Vivek's short life, even though he didn't live very long, he touched so many people around him, and he kind of will live longer with those characters. And while he struggled a lot, he was still such a bright life as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed, like, it's kind of weird to say I really enjoyed this book, because it was obviously again about the death of the main character, but I just loved how Akwaeke Emezi like explored the gender fluidity and like sexuality in this book, especially in a country like Nigeria, where, you know, homosexuality, transness, gender fluidity, like it's still very hard to be all of those things, and you know, there is a real danger to yourself kind of walking out the door being whoever you want to be, if it is not maybe like a cis straight person. Yeah, I really appreciated what was going on in this book. I really loved the tenderness that was in it, as well as the love in it, and then the lessons as well. I did like the fact that there was acceptance, particularly from like the parents in this book. Even though it did come a little bit too late, there was acceptance and love overall, like the like as a theme in the story. So yeah, I did enjoy it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I will definitely be reading more of Akwaeke Emezi's work, because yeah, I really enjoyed this one. So that's everything I read in June. Again, another great reading month. Please let me know what you guys read in June. Did you read any of these books that I have read? What was your favorite book in June? Would you recommend it? And I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.